All right, perfect. Seeing some familiar faces, welcome everyone to session 3 of Boost Camp. I'm going to share again the slide you saw at the start. So like I said, we are at session 3 of this program funded by the Cooperative Development Foundation. Thank you so much for attending. Very excited for everyone to be here today. So tonight's topic is going to be making membership meaningful with Leslie Watson. And apologies, this photo is a little bit out of date. Leslie is the executive director of the Cooperative Development Foundation. And unfortunately, I'm a little bit behind here. So Leslie, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and get started.
No problem. And the photo's not that out of date. And I'm actually with Cooperative Development Services, but it's no surprise that that there's a little that there's so many different kind of cooperative entities that have the word cooperative and development in their name. So I'm actually just going to share my own slide deck here. So just please give me one moment while I get oriented. Okay, here we go. Are you seeing it? Thumbs up on the slide deck? Awesome, great. Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's really a pleasure. I'm going to do just a quick introduction of myself and of Cooperative Development Services, my organization, and then really jump into, I would say, like almost like oh, I don't know, maybe my greatest hits of thinking about membership and the different ways that I do. There are such a range of ways that we can talk about making membership meaningful. We can be at that kind of 50,000 foot theoretical level, all the way down to like, what does the pledge form look like? And not knowing who is in the group and not knowing where you're at, I just thought I would share some things with you and then really design this to leave some time for questions and answers. So that's kind of our goal here tonight. So in the next hour, hopefully we'll accomplish all of those things. You'll hear my greatest hits, and we'll have some time just to kind of hear from whatever's on your mind. So my name is Leslie Watson, and I'm zooming into you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I have been happily cooperating for many years. I got a sense that some on this group, maybe all on this group, are startups. So I wanted to especially share with you my own experience with startup cooperatives. I've been involved in 2 startup co-ops over the years. The first was my home food co-op, which is the Eastside Food Co-op. That co-op, it's kind of like I'm justifying all my gray hairs here when I tell you that my involvement in that startup, that startup that I was involved in has celebrating its 21st year today. So it was a while ago, a 21st year this year. So it was a while ago, but I moved into this neighborhood after right as things were really kind of coming to a head, and the co-op organizing effort that had been unfolding over many years was actually starting to come to successful resolution. So about a year and a half before our co-op opened is when I joined our board. I spent about 10 years on that board and really had that nuts to bolts on the ground community grassroots experience of what it looks like to do that final push to get the store open, including some pretty deep engagement with members. And then our co-op rapidly hit some financial hard times. And so we had a whole other kind of engagement with our members through our open consumer-owned food co-op, really talking to them about how are we going to make sure this thing stabilizes and stays open. I spent about 10 years on the board. Eastside is now a very successful food co-op. But that early formative years of a really involved board, and then thinking we were kind of in the clear to step back and be a governing board, and then jumping back in to really save the co-op along with our general manager, definitely informed part of how I think about membership. The other startup effort that I was involved in, and actually am still involved in, is an all-volunteer co-op. We've been around for, we just had our annual meeting last night, and we launched in 2012. So we're at about 12 years, and that's a real estate investment co-op that a handful of folks and I helped to organize, as I said, about over 10 years ago. And that was to collect community capital, aggregate community capital to buy and redevelop commercial property right here in this neighborhood in Minneapolis. And we're still pretty small, but we do own 2 buildings and have been in it for a number of years now. And like I said, I'm board president these days, back on the board, and I'm board president. And we just had our annual meeting last night. And like any co-op, we've had some turbulence, we've had some successes, we've had some challenges. So what it looks like for membership to be meaningful in that co-op is also part of what I kind of bring into this conversation tonight. And then finally, before I joined Cooperative Development Services, I spent many years as a consultant with Columinate, which some of you may have heard of if any of you are attached to a food co-op. Columinate is a consulting cooperative, a shared services cooperative of independent consultants that provides services to a lot of different kinds of co-ops, but especially food co-ops all around the US. So our members, we have about 45 member consultants, have a very different kind of relationship with the co-op, because that's a co-op that we're part of. I was part of, and I'm still a member, but I no longer look to it as my employment. But when you have a co-op, it's not a worker co-op, but when you have a co-op that is how people are actually earning their livelihood, it brings yet another dimension to what it looks like to have meaningful membership. So I just wanted to kind of share that all with you to let you know, although a lot of my examples are rooted in food co-ops. I have, some pretty deep experiences with other kinds of co-ops as well. And then now I am the executive director as of November 4th, so just a little over 5 months ago, of Cooperative Development Services. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about that, and then I promise I'll get into the actual topic of the evening. So Cooperative Development Services is like Keystone. It is a regional cooperative development center. We were established 40 years ago. We're celebrating our 40th year this year. And we provide technical assistance, education, some grant writing and things like that to co-ops in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. That's our service area. And we have 5 staff members and just work with all different kinds of co-ops, egg co-ops, worker co-ops, food co-ops, senior housing co-ops, just a handful of the kind of co-ops that we work with. We also operate within CDS a subsidiary, 501c3. CDS is a 501c6. But our 501c3 is where we have an IRS letter of determination that confirms our charitable purpose of supporting the development of cooperative enterprises, which sounds like a bunch of word salad, but what it means is that our development fund, actually is able and does serve as a fiscal sponsor for cooperatives all around the country. So I just wanted to share that. I actually don't know if Keystone does that work or not. If it does, then in your region, Keystone would be the place to go. But we often do provide fiscal sponsorship services to co-ops when they want to accept charitable donations or go for grants or something like that, where a 501c3 is required. So that's kind of how the work that I am now doing is to help to lead and organize and manage all of that. And so that's enough about me and enough about CDS. All right, so let's get into membership, and I'm going to start with a caveat. Here is my caveat. Always with co-ops, your mileage may vary. We certainly can embrace good practice. We understand that there are like conventional or tried and true or effective ways of doing certain kinds of things. And then, as one of my former Columinate colleagues always used to say, his name is Adam Schwartz, he always used to say, if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op. So I just want to say, really affirm that what I'm going to share with you tonight is definitely got to be informed by what your co-op is doing, what your co-op is about, what the culture of your co-op is, what the expectations of your members are. All of that really, really matters. And yeah, I think there are some ways of thinking about things that are, if not fully universal, broadly applicable. So that's what I kind of wanted to focus on for tonight. All right. And okay, great. So good to know for Keystone. So if you're looking for a fiscal sponsor, you should tap into Keystone, because it's a really helpful service if you're not aware of it, to sometimes take advantage. I was just referring to the comment in the chat. A really helpful service that you can have sometimes when you need it. Okay, so I want to just start by actually thinking about why people choose to cooperate. And that question may seem so basic, and yet I think starting at that beginning place is very, very helpful if we want to build on top of that some answers that give us insight into what a meaningful membership relationships will look like. So one thing that we, certainly know is that as human beings, we are hardwired to compete. We have people definitely have competitive sense and a competitive spirit that shows up in how we interact with the world and with one another. But my picture of us cooperating is a little bit bigger because I like to believe that we are also equally or even more inclined to cooperate. Cooperation is also an innate way of being in the world, and our species has actually evolved to be in both modes. And so I just like to emphasize that because sometimes cooperation isn't, we're not quite as well, our muscles aren't quite as uh, well tuned to that sometimes, depending. And I just think understanding that as you think about membership, and especially if you're in a startup and you're inviting members to really begin to understand what a cooperative is and what it looks like and what it can be like, just to know that people are going to have different orientations, but everybody does have that innate capacity to be both ways, including cooperating. All right. So with that having been said, I actually have a question for you now, and I want you to find the chat. This is like a little waterfall chat moment. So type your answer in the chat after I ask the question, but don't press enter until I say go. I love to always see the answers all come down as a waterfall. So find the chat box, and here is my question for you. Why rather do your members, or why will your members, if you don't have any yet, why will they or do they cooperate? Just take a second and think about that. Whoever it is that's going to be a member of the co-op that you're involved in or already is. Why do they cooperate? Get ready, get your answer typed, and then go ahead and hit enter if you're ready. Shared mission, shared interests. Good. Look at the alignment in those answers, right? So this shared interest, more together than alone. I love all these answers, and they lead so neatly to where I actually like to start to when I want to puzzle through what we're talking about and what we're really all about, and the why of why people want to come together to cooperate. Some threads of where I'm about to go show up in your answers there. And the place that I like to go for that is actually the formal definition of a cooperative as promulgated by the International Cooperative Alliance. Here's a little snippet of it, which tells us that a co-op is an autonomous association of people united voluntarily. So it's people who are come together to meet common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So figuring out what this says to me, and where I always, always come back to this, is the centrality of that common need. Like you all said, they want to do a thing in community. They want to be more together than alone, and they have these shared mission or shared interests, this alignment that we are looking for sharing. And and I actually don't know who you all are in this room, but I'm assuming some of you at least are either on the board or maybe working to develop a co-op or on a steering committee or something like that. Maybe you're just interested members, but really spending time, really intentional time and careful time, and coming back in an iterative process to getting after what we are actually about is foundational to having meaningful membership relationships and to having people meaningfully participate in the cooperative. And that sounds like almost you might be saying, well, duh. And yet I really paused to think about that. And I've been thinking about it a lot because I came into my work at CDS really as a food cooperator, doing so much work in food co-ops. So I would have maybe a stock answer or a set of answers about why people come to cooperate that was really informed by my experience with food co-ops. And I have really been stepping way back and reminding myself that your mileage may vary. So now in my work, we're working much more with producer co-ops, for instance. And if you're a bunch of farmers, you may well come up with a very different answer than food cooperators would about why we're going to cooperate. So we recently did a training for startup farmer co-ops, and this is the quote that we offered to them from Edgar Parnell, who is a CEO, a former CEO of a foundation in the UK that worked a lot with ag co-ops. And his answer to that was that the purpose of a co-op, an agricultural co-op, is to intervene in the marketplace to get a better deal for its member owners. That might not be, maybe that is the reason why your members are cooperating, but it might not be. The reasons for that might look a lot different. And yet, if you really think about why farmers traditionally have come together to cooperate, it is really to aggregate their goods, maybe commodity goods, so that they can participate in a marketplace where there is a lot of competition. And so they are coming together to cooperate is to find strength in numbers so that they can actually compete and make a living in the marketplace. We even have laws in this country that really allow farmers to do that. When people come together to pool resources to try to market together, that can actually be a restricted activity. It can bring up antitrust violations and so on and so forth. So there's special exemptions for farmers to be able to do that. And it's to really level the playing field and allow them to step into the marketplace together. Very different reason why we might cooperate in other instance. And again, worker co-ops, like your mileage may vary. The reasons might be really different, might be closer to what that previous quote said. But if we look at what now the International Cooperative Alliance says around the kind of the objectives of worker co-ops, we can see a lot of more nuance in the answer. So the International Organization of Industrial and Service Cooperatives, which is part of the ICA, says that worker co-ops exist to create and maintain sustainable jobs, generate wealth, improve the quality of life for the worker members, dignify human work, allow workers to have democratic self-management, and to promote community and local development. Like that's a pretty heavy lift, actually. But it's obviously maybe got a little bit, quite a bit wider look into the why. And if this is the why for any particular organization, that there's going to be just a different, maybe some different allocation of resources, different ways that we think about bringing in new members, and different ways that we think about organizing the co-op to do activities. So just again, your mileage may vary, and really getting clear about that is very important as you work to develop your cooperatives. Last but not least, I'll come back to my home co-op. This actually is our produce department. And I wanted to just pause on the why for my home food co-op, the Eastside Food Co-op. It has what we call an ends policy, which is kind of like a statement of the mission, if you will, our why. And so it's to be part of a fair and equitable food system, to have a well-run business that serves community, that provides high quality choice, and that is a diverse network of people connected through shared values. Again, kind of a more expansive look, but some different things that are emphasized than even that definition of the purpose of a worker co-op that was equally expansive. So all just to say is that, this is a work to figure out what this looks like. And some of the one piece of wisdom, that from one of my mentors in cooperative development, it has always stayed with me. And this is Bill, a gentleman by the name of Bill Gessner, who no longer with us, but was very influential in helping food co-ops kind of figure out what development looks like and help them along their way. And he always said that in the early days, like you start with 20% alignment around what you're actually about, that shared purpose. It's not like a neat and tidy thing that you just figure out and you kind of cast it in cement and say, we're done, one and done on the purpose. No, you start with 20%. And as time goes along, and maybe you get to the point where your co-op actually opens its doors, maybe you get to 80% alignment. You're never going to get to 100% full alignment, but 80% is the time when your co-op has really got the maturity of purpose that maybe it's ready to step into commerce. So I've always just thought that it's almost a relief, especially if you're in the early organizing days and you're actually not quite sure what our purpose is, to understand that 20% alignment would actually be pretty normal. Okay, so I want to come back to that definition from of a cooperative from the International Cooperative Alliance, because it has a couple of other really important and key attributes beyond the common need, the common purpose, that we want to spend some time on as we think about developing a meaningful member relationships. So here's the definition again. So we had the common needs and aspirations, and then I have a couple other elements highlighted here. The jointly owned enterprise. So something to remember always when you're thinking about relationships with your member and having meaningful member relationships is that you're in business together. People are owning a business together. Um, Cooperatives kind of have this dual identity where there's this association of people coming together to find alignment on purpose, and they're doing that in this human way of cooperating, these human relationships, but they're also stepping into the marketplace. They have to compete in the traditional capitalist society, and they have to organize themselves so that business can successfully do that. And members internalizing, at least to some degree, that they do own a business together is usually, not always, but usually pretty critical to the cooperative being successful. So that's an important component for us to think about. And then the other one, of course, our unique special sauce as cooperatives is that democratic control. And that is another one of those places where your mileage may vary significantly. People have different ways of manifesting democratic control, but they're in a recognizable spectrum for cooperatives. So that brings me back to another way that I like to think about the essential features of a cooperative that relate to members is kind of this sturdy foundation. And it's kind of like a much simpler way with fewer words of thinking about some of the elements in that definition. So if our co-op membership program and its orientation and an organization is securely structured, or those relationships are sound, then we're going to make that nice sturdy triangle. And that's where we have one leg is the member benefit, the purpose, so that members know what the purpose is and what they get out of it in many ways, and what the co-op is there to achieve. Where that member equity, like equity as owners, members understand what their economic relationship is to the co-op. That is, clear and coherent and makes sense and fits the needs of the co-op and the capacity of the members. And then that democratic piece, members understand where their democratic control, how it shows up and how it all works. And so when that all fits together, and if you can design your co-op or work toward having a co-op that has all those pieces really clear, now you kind of are, kind of be cooking with gas, as they say. So what does that require? What do we need to get there? And I often think of, like, when I think of membership, I think of bylaws, something around, if we go to the bylaws where we have the kind of the formal high level expectations around membership. Sometimes you'll see member rights, very important, but I always really appreciate it when the bylaws list both the rights and the responsibilities, because there's actually a mutuality there. The co-op is not just there to, be a servant to the members, because the members own this business together. So there is a mutuality of that relationship, and in order for that to work, there needs to be a mutual understanding between the members and the co-op about what is required. So there's a lot of at the co-op leadership side, maybe the board. People are thinking about how are we going to understand these members? How are we going to structure and focus the co-op to meet the needs of members? I think something really important to keep in mind for that is that members are not monolithic. And my go-to for, I promised you this was my greatest hits. My go-to for this has always been a really great article that a former colleague of mine, Marilyn Scholl, wrote. Again, for food co-ops, but I think there are some parallels that we can draw, certainly, or some usefulness to other kinds of co-ops as well. It's an article in Co-op Grocer called "Appreciating the Diversity of Member Needs and Motivations." There's a little QR code here if you're interested. You can also find it by Googling it. And in this article, what I really like about it is that Marilyn, kind of likened this to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you can see we have this little pyramid of activities or relationships to the co-op here. And for each of these, there's a, kind of a loose sort of parallel to moving up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as leaders and stewards of the co-op, it's really important to recognize that people have a diverse set of needs and motivations. Might be on a narrower band in certain kinds of co-ops. In a food co-op, certainly all of these are always present. So at the very bottom, you can see we have just customers. In many co-ops, there might be non-patron customers, people who aren't members who still use the co-op services, and they're just there for the services. Like, they're not really thinking of themselves as members. They're there to buy the groceries or, whatever else it might be that your co-op is doing. Not every co-op, is organized that way, but many are. Um, so, those folks, like in a grocery store, they just want to shop at a nice grocery store. They want to, maybe we'll get them to join. Maybe they might join, they're like shoppers, and they see, oh, there's a benefit here that I like. Like, what's in it for me is the radio station they're tuned into, the WIFM radio station, and they're like, oh, a discount. Oh, I can get a deal. Oh, well, maybe I will sign up. So we might be able to move them from customers to shopping members, one step up, a little bit deeper into relationship with the co-op, by becoming shopping members. But really, the primary focus of their activity is shopping. And if you're a grocery store in particular, like, you love all these people. And in fact, as many as half or more of your shoppers might be in those bottom two bands, maybe even 75%. A lot of people, that's as far as they want to go. They just want to use the services of the co-op, and that's completely fine. And and this kind of roughly aligns, you might say, with meeting kind of the physiological needs of Maslow's hierarchy, if you're familiar with this. But according to Maslow's model, once kind of physical needs are met, then people start to move up and to seek other kinds of needs, social needs, like belonging. And I think that, in consumer-owned food co-ops and other kinds of co-ops, some people see the co-op as really part of their social identity. And so I am a cooperator is what they might lead with. And they might be really more in that mid level where they say, oh, cooperating, participating in how this makes me feel, being with like-minded people, that alignment, they're going to be paying more attention to that alignment around purpose. And that's just like another way that and maybe a little bit deeper connection to the co-op as an entity instead of just the services that it provides. They want to be part of what it represents, whether that's in the community, if it's a worker co-op. You imagine in a worker co-op, you might have some people who are employees who are not member owners. They're not owners of the co-op. So they might be kind of like our customers. And then you may have some people who are kind of ownership curious, and they're kind of starting to move up, or maybe they're in their probationary period. And then they become owners, full owners. And within that ownership status, they're going to be a range of how people see their ownership. Sometimes it's just like, I want to have this kind of relationship in my workplace. I like the people, and I'm solid right here in this middle tier. Always in a cooperative, though, you need to have, and you will have, people who step even deeper into it and begin to really understand that they do own this business together, and that caring for the enterprise and being more active in the enterprise they're both motivated by that, and it's actually needed by the enterprise. And so these are the people who kind of start to move up. And at the very top, those active owners, what Marilyn talks about in her article for a grocery store, those are the folks who like join the board. Member owners are the ones who show up in the annual meeting, and then one step higher is when we join the board. And the whole, everybody is important. They're all important. And as leaders in the co-op, you just need to understand whatever your layers look like, whatever your layer cake looks like in your co-op, understanding that there's not a one size fits all for what your members need and want, and the relationship they're going to have to the co-op is important. And also recognizing that there can be movement up, hopefully up, into deeper levels of engagement. You kind of need to build those ladders. So how do we take someone who's just kind of casually interested in our co-op curious, and get them to actually join? And then once they've joined, probably some people do jump right up to running for the board. That's kind of what happened to me in my co-op, but not always. Some people, just are going to kind of hang back and see, or some people are just more casual about it. But maybe there's some ways for us to build bridges for people to get into deeper relationships with the co-op. So as you think about what makes membership meaningful, think, well, and what type of membership, and then what is the pathway that we can build for people to become more deeply engaged in the members. So that's the co-op, just one way of you all thinking about how the co-op's going to understand the wonderful diversity of its membership and the ways in which they want to relate to the co-op. There's also, on the member side, for members especially to get into that deeper relationship, they have some work to do. The co-op has work to do to facilitate this, but members who are really committed also have some work to do to understand the co-op. And the way that I often like to think about this is to go to, again, an older article from a gentleman by the name of Brett Fairbairn out of the Canadian Center for the Study of Cooperatives up in Saskatchewan. And a number of years ago, he published this lengthy article called Three Strategic Concepts for the Guidance of Cooperatives, in which he identified three core areas that really to pay attention to have meaningful, strong relationships with members. So I'm just going to mention them briefly. But again, there's a QR code. You can also easily find this by Googling, and it's well worth the time to read it because I think it's really thoughtful. And I think has a really good piece. One way of thinking about the truth. Excuse me, I just got a window popped over my clicker here. Okay. So the first of the strategic concepts is the economic linkage. And this kind of gets back to our equity piece. These are members and members, well, it's actually both equity and purpose, so that we want the members to be able to really trust that the co-op is devoted to meeting their needs. There's that. And that part of their needs is to understand how their equity, how their patronage work inside of the co-op, so that there's a real economic linkage between the members' engagement with the co-op and kind of what they see coming out of the co-op and their experience of the co-op, how they invest, how they shop, and how their needs are met. Fair pricing, whatever that kind of looks like in your particular co-op. If it's a housing co-op, that there's a clear relationship between my equity that I put in or my rent that I pay and how resources are being used, whatever that looks like. So, just really paying attention to economic linkage. Members need to be active participants in that because they have to do the work to link it and to understand it. And co-ops need to do some work to make sure that members actually can understand it and have the information that they need. The next thing to think about and to maybe orient your member programs or your ways of engaging with members is transparency. So we never want the co-op to be a black box to members. We want them to understand the business. Ideally, they do the work to understand the services, the industry, whatever that is, its financial performance. And really importantly to me is that members understand that this is kind of moving the dial, the radio station from what's in it for me, kind of that lower level of the pyramid as they move up. Members can begin to understand that there are actually a variety of needs of other stakeholders that the cooperative exists to meet that may not be like perfectly aligned with their own. So some capacity to see the cooperative as not just being like a bunch of mini me's, but a lot of different kinds of people who are coming together, and that the co-op is attending to the needs of stakeholders other than the member, him or her, or themselves, is important. And again, that's about transparency because members aren't going to just automatically know that, but they have to do the work and be committed to understanding that. And then last is cognition that Fairbairn talks about. And this is that members also have a sense of the identity and mission. The co-op has that sense and it imparts it to members. And that kind of brings us back to purpose to some extent. But that this model or whatever we're about is widely understood and shared by all stakeholders. So it's like, it's a little bit of like a, it's not like a checklist of how to do these things. It's more a way of thinking about what it takes and what Fairbairn argues that it takes, like a kind of another form of a strong foundation of member relationships, that they understand how the co-op operates economically and how it's linked to their needs and how their investment and equity contribute to that, that there's transparency in the co-ops, the business and how it's performing, and all the stakeholders that are needed, and that we actually understand the purpose and there's an articulable purpose that everybody can kind of get behind. So that's just I'm just offering it as another way to think about what it takes to have meaningful relationship with members. All right, so now that was like a whole great big bunch of conceptual, I would say in some ways conceptual stuff. And I definitely wanted to attend to giving you also some practical tools. And I just want to say, I don't know, I can't quite really see people, but if maybe you could just people like raise their hand or tell me in the chat, like how many of you are actually some kind of a startup? Maybe I should have asked this to begin with, but I don't know if there's. You guys gotta
Do you mean like actively like working to?
working to start a co-op as opposed to having one in place. Yeah. Okay. See at least one hand. Yeah. Or newly formed, kind of still building. Okay. Okay. So maybe a lot of you aren't, but I still think actually this is kind of a useful, even if you are not doing this for the first time, even if you could fill in all these blanks right now, it's still, I think, a very useful way to think about membership. And that, oh, I see another raised hand. So thank you for that. Okay, so this is the ownership model canvas, and it's a riff on the business model canvas. It is a totally different kind of tool that's also very useful for thinking about how your business is going to operate and how you're going to set up your business to operate in the marketplace. But the folks at Start.coop offer this as a tool, and we use it and encourage people to we use it through in some of our workshops. This ownership model canvas, and so I have again the QR code. You can also just find it by Googling. But this is a really good tool to start to get kind of like brass tacks or real about some of the things I've been talking about. So you can see there's 8 different boxes here. And number 1 is just what I just spent about 10 minutes talking about, which is purpose. What are we here to achieve? And if we are already open and operating a business, like how readily can we fill in that box? And if it's if 6 different people would fill it in 6 different ways, like it might be a useful exercise to spend some time and seeing what would it look like to get alignment on our purpose. Can we say that with some clarity and some coherence? Then we start to think through the stakeholders. So who actually are our member owners, current or prospective? And, kind of whatever, the people who might have a longer term interest in the co-op, sustained users of our services, people who might be interested in becoming worker owners, farmers who might be producing goods that could be part of our pooled grain or whatever it looks like. And also let's be sure that we're paying attention to our non-owner stakeholders, especially in a consumer co-op, kind of the bottom of our layer cake, but not just that, because, co-ops often have, especially if they're really committed to that cooperative principle around concern for community, do have in their DNA a tendency to think about their relationship to the wider world, not just the members in the business, but the non-owner stakeholders. Then, once we kind of are clear about who those people are, we can start to really articulate the benefits that our members do receive or want to receive or might want to receive as part of our cooperative enterprise. And hand in hand, like what are some responsibilities? So the what's in it for me, as well as what are the expectations of membership. You might, if you have bylaws in place, I would encourage you to go and look and see, do we have rights, both rights and responsibilities? Could we find those? The bylaws aren't the full and complete place where we state those, but that's certainly one place where we might find some. Then on that, kind of getting to that democratic control piece, we start to think about governance rights. Again, the bylaws are a source for that. There's also cultural pieces that you really want to understand. Key decisions, what is the process, by which set of stakeholders? A lot of times that's going to be a board of directors and a cooperative. In my home state statute, as well as in many states, it's really clear a cooperative is governed by the board, and there is a place for us to add a lot of texture and nuance to that in our bylaws. So the co-op might be governed by the board, but there might be some very clear ways in which members retain important rights. Might be a lot of those, in a collective management kind of situation, we might have bylaws that look really different around governance than in a kind of a more traditional members elect the board and then delegate to the board the authority to govern on their behalf. So whatever that looks like let's have alignment between how we're structured and what the expectations are. And if there is a mismatch, then we have some work to do. Your mileage may vary, and we only get to 80%. So we know that it's very funny. And I mentioned we had our annual meeting last night for our real estate co-op. We proposed some bylaw changes, and I reported the results, and we had 6 of them. And everything passed, thank goodness, because I think they were all needed at a rate from between, I think it was 81% to 100%. Not everybody agreed with all those changes that the board proposed, but the membership, we had a super majority that did approve them. But there were some people who had some questions for us, fair enough, because that's really important. The bylaws are telling members what are our governance rights. So can they see them? Do they understand them? do they have the opportunity to weigh in on them? And are we structuring them in a way where we get to at least 80% that people can kind of live with it, you know? The financial rights is another piece in the ownership model canvas and in any cooperative. It's both our equity stake in the co-op is a piece of that, but also really importantly for any co-op, how do we distribute surplus? How do we do patronage, or how do we, you know, in a worker co-op, often the term is surplus. Co-ops operate at cost. Typically, hopefully they are profitable and they can do different things with those profits, including needed investment in the co-op, but they are not operating to generate, you know, excess profit for external investors. That's not the point of a co-op. So any kind of excess, any way in which we operate to excess, we should have a plan for that, and it should be aligned with our member expectations, or we should be communicating to them what their rights are and have some kind of an engagement around that. So in the case of a worker co-op, as just as one example, you know, when you design a worker co-op, you might say, well, if we have profit, we're going to allocate it based on the proportionate amount of fill in the blank. And there's usually two options for filling in the blank. The number of hours worked. So if you worked more hours, you would get a proportionately greater share of the profits. That's one way to do it. And then another way to do it is the amount of wages earned. And so if you are at a rate of $75,000 in a year, then you would get twice as much of the profit as someone, twice as much as someone who earned $37,500, right? So either one could be okay. But you can, if you just really think about it, you can see the orientation and the equity issues or the values issues, you might say, that show up based on how you choose to to allocate your surplus. If it's on hours worked, then we're elevating the value of the labor that we do. And if it's on wages, then we're kind of really the time that we spend. And if it's on wages, it's like how much we're paid for that time. Your mileage may vary. Anything could be legitimate. But it's just a really important thing to hammer out if you're going to be a worker co-op, because it's going to really inform how people have a relationship with profit and how they see their role in the co-op. I guess I kind of skipped over guidance, but you know, especially for a startup, you're gonna really want to be clear about who you're this lower box on the left. You know, who's helping us, and actually in an established co-op as well, who are our experts, our good friends at Keystone, our auditors, our legal advisors, our, you know, whoever else it is. And then, you know, how do we think about them? But then really importantly as well, like if and when we have a board of directors, how do we think about allocating the governance rights among those? A lot of times in a co-op, in some kinds of co-ops, you know, again, I don't know what kinds you all are representing. You know, there's not a distinction. The board just represents everybody. But for instance, in a worker co-op, there might be different kind of classes. If you have a multi-stakeholder co-op, there's certainly going to be different kinds of classes. If you're in a farmer co-op, you know, sometimes those are by district or whatever. There's just different ways to think about it. And so you need to, you know, allocate the board seats to those different stakeholder groups. And then last, again, this is a question for startups. That's why this is part of this initial ownership model canvas, but it's also an important question on an ongoing basis. And especially if your co-op is financially struggling, or if you're looking for investment to do new projects, thinking about how much investment we need broadly, but from our members as well. So what is that initial membership stake? And is it still right? That's a question some co-ops have come up with. And just, you know, just as one example, longtime food co-ops that opened in the 60s and the 70s, maybe they might have originally had, it's like $20 to join the co-op or something, $10 to join the co-op, something like that. And that maybe was fine for that time. These days in startup food co-ops, it's often several $100s. It's a recognition of the extraordinary amount of money that it takes to open a grocery store these days. You know, and so that's just, you know, this is one example. There are equity considerations in that. If we make membership too expensive, now we're making decisions about accessibility. So there's a lot to be discussed there. And again, the whole point of an exercise like this is that you are doing this together as a leadership group maybe with input from your members, so that you can begin to go from 20 to 80%. Or if you're at 40%, kind of nudge closer to 80%. And when you use this particular tool as a startup tool, it's really helpful to actually come back to it. So you can see on the upper right-hand corner, it says version. And so, this is really intended to be iterative and for people to really work to develop this over time. So if you were able to fill this all out with like in 30 seconds flat with clarity with 8 people from your co-op, I would say you probably have a pretty meaningful and robust relationship with your members. If it was 8 board members who've been sitting in a silo all by themselves for years, maybe not so much. But if it's any number of people who really are engaged with the fuller membership and can really fill this out, easily, then you're probably solid. But if you can't, and most people probably wouldn't be able to, it might help you kind of divine some places where there's some work to be done. Okay, so leadership ladder. Oh, great. Yes, right. Okay, so I just have a couple more things, and then we'll open it up to questions. I wanted to just I again, because I actually wasn't quite sure who would be in the room. I definitely wanted to come back to really practical strategies. So I wanted you to have a tool if you were a startup, and then just maybe some check the box things. How are we doing in some of these core areas that require work and attention in order for us to have a meaningful relationship with members, in my experience? So the first one, so important for a co-op, which commits to education, training, and information, and is a membership organization, is that we do have some form of robust member education, orientation sessions for new members, ongoing education about both the business and cooperative principles, and maybe some kind of like I don't know, sometimes there's mentorship programs, particularly in smaller co-ops, a worker co-op, for instance, where people come in and there's cultural norms to learn, there's the business to learn, there's understanding how to cooperate, and having more experienced cooperators kind of give a hand to the new folks can be really helpful. So whatever that looks like for your co-op, your mileage may vary, but you should have a car. Let's put it that way. The next is that, again, in whatever form is appropriate for co-op, to have clear and accessible communication channels. So in a food co-op, that could be the, kind of from the consumer end, it could be the bulletin board where you put up product requests and complaints, and someone on the management team makes sure they get answered. That's a really obvious one, but so important. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to, when I'm, go back to use the restroom with my co-op, I always take a few minutes and just stand to see what kind of things are people asking for and complaining about. Just kind of like that. But there's many other kinds of communication channels as well. In a worker co-op, now we're in an employment situation, kind of the things you need in any HR situation are, always important, and especially important. Members need a clear way to communicate to the board, and staff sometimes need a clear way to communicate to the board, or whoever the authority is. And we need to have means of information flowing out from leadership. So we need both unidirectional, from members to the co-op, whoever inside of the co-op they need to communicate with, from co-op leadership out to members, and then places for communication to actually be bi-directional, where there's some kind of engagement. So if you can name some that have those flavors, then you're maybe in some pretty good shape on communication. Meaningful opportunities for participation, and again, can look really different. Sometimes that just means, if where I'm at on that pyramid in my food co-op is that I just am a shopper, then I want really meaningful ways to make my product requests. So that's that bulletin board again, or meaningful way to be able to talk to staff about how do I cook this, whatever, this new produce that you have. Then and that all goes all the way up to great annual meetings where there's a clear invitation, where people really feel like there's good information, where voting happens in a robust way. People are informed about what they're, kind of what they're voting on, the directors that they're choosing. That's kind of at the other end of it. That's at that top of that pyramid, that active owners, and all in between. Meaningful opportunities for participation for all the people who are at different levels of engagement with the co-op. Cultivating a strong cooperative culture includes things like especially in a startup, honestly, like, I don't even know, it's so easy to miss this, but like actually celebrating achievements and milestones and appreciation. Like, it's just kind of like so basic, but it's something that gets missed so often. And I too, like, if you're head down in a startup or head down in an all volunteer organization, it can be like, it's just like another thing to do to make sure we do appreciation, but it's actually really important. We are in an association of people who want to meet common needs and who want to cooperate. And so emphasizing that human dimension of it and really having appreciation for one another is a really important part of that, having an emotional connection to the co-op. And then social events that build relationships between members, recognizing when members make contributions, whether that's directors or just everyday, members who do something for them. Just like ways to recognize and to connect people can help to build that cooperative culture. We want members to actually see the value of their membership. That's kind of an education piece, what the benefits are. They understand how patronage works. And then this kind of that transparency and cognition piece come together here, like whether it's our annual scorecard about how we did or our annual report where we're, kind of talking about impact, whatever that looks like, a ways where members can really see the tangible value of being a member to them. And then last, but definitely not least, most of my work as a consultant was around governance. You may have caught a flavor of that and how I've been talking, I don't know. But, I just really think that, clear ways for members to run for the board really committing to accountability to the membership, and then kind of understanding that you are running a business, you often do need professional management. And yet, you are a democratic organization, so you need to have space for member control to show up in meaningful and appropriate ways. So, these are things like to pay attention to and to say, how are we doing these things? And are we meeting whatever the adjective is here, effective, tangible, meaningful, robust? You can kind of hear that. What are we aspiring to, and how are we making sure that the ways that we do these 6 core things are showing up well? All right, this is the last little thing I wanted to end with a handful of closing thoughts. And again, I was thinking maybe there would be a lot of startups. And so I'm kind of thinking back to what it looks like to be in a startup and what a startup is. Startups totally need champions. They're critical. And yet they're not enough to fully bring your co-op to life because champions burn out. And because if it's all about the champion, then you're actually not building a wide enough platform of support for a cooperative to actually thrive. So be mindful, if you are a champion, that purpose is not developed in a silo. And if you just have a handful of people who are super clear on what purpose and member benefit looks like, you're probably operating at that 20%. So that's one to really check yourself on. The next one is that, especially again in a startup, but actually at all stages of life, you have to be pretty intentional about cultivating leadership throughout the development process or throughout the life cycle of your cooperative. Leadership, certainly we all know people who stepped into leadership who just seem born to it, who just come to it, it's serendipitous, but a lot of times leadership is cultivated and among your membership because you're a co-op. So having ways to really cultivate and support that leadership on an ongoing basis is really important because again, champions burn out. And so we need to be developing the pipeline of the next champions or leaders. I always like to lift up that the board of directors is engaged in a dance. You heard me say the board governs the cooperative, but if we just stopped there, like the board has this expansive authority to govern, decide, and delegate typically. But if we just put a period there, then your membership probably not going to be happy, especially if the board messes up. But it's going to really ignore the other half of that accountability that the board has to ensure that members have adequate representation, information, and voice. So that is our dance. We govern, and we govern at the pleasure of the people, right? And then last, like I sometimes say this is what we cross stitch on the pillow. whatever the big thing is, that gets across stitch on the pillow. Members are at the heart of the co-op. For any co-op, that's in commerce, member loyalty and member patronage are like the strategic advantage. Like, we need to be able to meet members' needs for the cooperative to be successful as a social enterprise, as a social organization, but also as a business enterprise. So that's why we want to really orient the co-op to member or potential member needs. That's kind of where our market is, right? All of that having been said, though, ending by saying, remember, meeting member needs does not meeting every individual member's demands. I say, like, just because you're a member of the food co-op doesn't mean you get to dictate how we merchandise the tomatoes. That's not what it's all about. So I just like to kind of end with that, because it sounds like, oh my God, members, we just have to meet every member need. No, we need to meet members' needs to be responsive to them, but really fundamentally to have a healthy and effective and functioning cooperative that at a high level can meet their needs. And there you go. That is my roadshow, and I think we just have a few minutes, but I'd be super happy to take any questions or feedback that you have on whether this was helpful or any thoughts you have.
Hi, Leslie. I'll just quickly say I'm not stalking you here. I'm actually still looking forward to having a cup of coffee with you.
Yes. Oh, yes. Hello. Hi. Yes, definitely. You showed up as Noemi initially.
I'm not
So
sure how
yes,
that
I
happened,
know.
so.
Okay, I owe you an email. Yeah.
I'm here, and I sit on the board of KDC, but I'm also here because, as a bunch of us former USAID people are now looking at worker co-op models, actually. So we're trying to walk our own walk a little bit. So anyhow, look forward to that. And also, we did appreciate the work that you did with the OCDC board. Who knows where that will go right now, but governance matters. And so, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
Yes, that was thank you. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Columinate did some work with them back in the day. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Good. All right. Thanks.
Good. Yeah. Thanks. Great.
Say, we are at the top of the hour. If anyone has like a last minute question, you can enter it in the chat. But Leslie, thank you so much for that impactful presentation. I just felt like that last slide was such a great way to close. But just as a reminder that we're on our 3rd of 7th session of Boost Camp, you should all receive a follow-up email with the opportunity to register for future sessions. This session also came with an optional $15 meal voucher. When you get that follow-up email, if you'd like to request it and you haven't already, you are welcome to do that. And once again, I'll point to the survey in the chat to let us know how it went. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for attending. I don't see any. Oh, and actually, Liz, if you're willing to take one last question, that just dropped in the chat.
Yeah, hybrid member. So this is because Durham, I think, is a hybrid co-op. You have both a worker and a consumer-owned class. If I'm not mistaken? Is that right? Yeah, I think that's true. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, quick thoughts on hybrid. Well, it's really funny. In some ways, I want to say, ask me in 6 months, because I'm actually right now working with a co-op that is converting, or not really converting, but the worker ownership class is springing to existence. I do think what I think is that the membership, like, here's the one, my quick answer on that is, like, a lot of this stuff still applies, but there's going to be like a little tune of the orientation depending on your class. But the most important thing, I think, is really supporting workers. And if it's a worker consumer owned model like Durham, really supporting workers to be successful in the governance role. And I know the metaphor I've been using with the crew I've been working with is like the hats. And actually, consumer owned directors need to understand which hat. So we did a whole exercise with a bunch of different hats. Here I'm wearing my deli manager hat. And that's going to be really different than when I'm wearing my director hat, or when I'm wearing even my social activist hat or whatever. Like, so just really understanding that the governance role, when we're talking about governance, which is a very important part of a hybrid model, people need to be really clear that they have a different set of duties than they do as employees, and also true with membership. So members wear different hats at different times. So it's not really like the tightest answer in the world, but I do think that, kind of maybe starting with the employees in a hybrid consumer and worker owned model to really support them to their understanding of that, because I think in some ways they have the most complexity in the relationships, is maybe a good starting point. And if we come up with any good stuff as we work with this market that's moving that direction, they may be tapping Durham, but I think it's an opportunity for some sharing among cooperatives about what's working really well as we see more of those come online. So. Great.
All right,
Okay.
thank you so much. And we're
All right.
a few minutes. Oh, sorry, did someone? I'll just say we're a few minutes past the hour. So thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you again in a future session. And thank you again for this fantastic presentation.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you.